My name is Melissa Chen, and 6 months ago, I was named Physician of the Year by the Governor of Massachusetts for my research on early detection methods for pancreatic cancer. It was surreal standing on that stage at the State House, accepting an award that recognized 15 years of work that most people, especially my family, never thought I was capable of achieving. I'm now the director of oncological research at Boston Medical Center, leading a team of 30 brilliant scientists. We've developed a breakthrough blood test that can detect pancreatic cancer markers up to 18 months earlier than previous methods, increasing survival rates from 9% to nearly 45% in our clinical trials. The irony is that my success story began at another formal dinner, my college graduation, where my father publicly declared to our entire extended family that I would never amount to much and certainly never go far in medicine. The pain I carry isn't simply about seeking validation from my father. It's about the systematic erasure of my identity and capabilities that occurred throughout my childhood and early adulthood. My father, a renowned neurosurgeon with 3 generations of doctors before him, created a household where intellectual achievement was the only currency that mattered. But somehow, no matter what I accomplished, it was never enough. My perfect SAT scores were luck. My full scholarship to Johns Hopkins was because they needed more diversity candidates. My graduation with honors was the easiest medical specialty. Every achievement was diminished while my brother Michael's were magnified. It wasn't just about approval, it was about fighting to exist in a narrative where I had been designated the supporting character rather than the protagonist of my own life. In 2 weeks, my parents are hosting their annual 4th of July barbecue at their Beacon Hill home, an event that's become somewhat legendary in Boston medical circles. It's always a grand affair with prominent physicians, hospital administrators, and even local politicians in attendance. What nobody knows is that I've recently discovered something that will change everything about our family dynamic. 3 months ago, while cleaning out my late grandmother's house in Providence, I found a locked box hidden in the back of her closet. Inside was a journal she kept during my early childhood, detailing how my father systematically sabotaged my early academic opportunities while promoting my brothers. The most shocking revelation, he redirected a prestigious childhood science scholarship meant for me to my brother instead, forging my signature on a declination letter. This wasn't just typical favoritism. It was calculated sabotage that altered the trajectory of my education and early career. What would you do if you discovered that the person who should have been your biggest champion was actually your biggest obstacle? How would you handle learning that your struggles weren't just in your head, that they were the result of deliberate actions meant to hold you back while elevating someone else? The American dream tells us that hard work and determination are enough to succeed. But what happens when your own family is secretly ensuring you'll never have a fair chance? For the children of immigrants like me, the pressure to succeed is already enormous. We carry the weight of our parents' sacrifices on our shoulders. But what if those same parents are playing favorites in ways that go beyond normal family dynamics? I've spent my entire life trying to prove my worth through academic and professional achievements. I graduated top of my class from medical school, published more research papers than anyone in my cohort, and worked 80-hour weeks for years developing a screening protocol that's now saving thousands of lives. Yet at every family gathering, my father still introduces my brother first, still puts his arm around Michael's shoulder while keeping me at a distance. The emotional labor of maintaining my composure at these events is exhausting, smiling through the comparisons, the backhanded compliments, the subtle ways my accomplishments are attributed to luck or circumstance rather than intelligence or hard work. I'm tired of existing in this contradictory space, praised publicly but minimized privately, celebrated in medical journals but forgotten at the family dinner table. There's something particularly painful about being humiliated in contexts that should be celebrations. My college graduation was supposed to be a moment of pride. The first woman in our extended family to graduate from an Ivy League medical program. Instead, it became the stage for my father's most public dismissal of my abilities. "She'll probably end up in family practice or pediatrics," he told my uncle, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "She doesn't have what it takes for a specialty that requires real precision and intelligence, not like Michael." I still remember the pitying looks from my classmates and their parents, the way my mother stared at her plate instead of defending me, the burning humiliation that stayed with me through my residency and fellowship. Have you ever achieved something remarkable only to have someone you love make you feel small about it? Have you ever wondered why, no matter what you accomplish, certain people in your life seem determined to ensure you never feel successful? Today, I'm going to share how I finally confronted this dynamic in my family, how I discovered the truth behind years of subtle sabotage, and how standing up for myself led to the most important recognition of my career. This isn't just a story about professional success. It's about reclaiming your narrative when others are determined to write you out of it. It's about recognizing that sometimes the people who should support you the most are actually undermining you in ways you can't even imagine. From the outside, the Chen family embodied the quintessential American success story. My father, Dr. William Chen, was the chief of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital. My mother, a respected art history professor at Boston University. We lived in a beautiful brownstone in Beacon Hill, donated to charities, attended fundraising galas, and were fixtures at cultural events throughout Boston. My parents were often featured in local media as exemplars of immigrant achievement and community leadership. They had arrived from Taiwan in the 1980s with scholarships and determination, building prestigious careers while raising two children who seemed destined to follow in their footsteps. Neighbors and colleagues would comment on how fortunate I was to grow up in such an accomplished family, with parents who valued education and excellence. What they couldn't see were the cracks beneath this carefully constructed facade, the relentless pressure, the conditional love based on achievement, and the stark difference in how my brother and I were treated. Behind our heavy mahogany front door, our home operated on an entirely different value system. My father ruled our household with exacting standards and an unwavering belief in hierarchy, both generational and gender-based. He was a man who graduated first in his class at Taipei Medical University, completed his residency at Johns Hopkins, and built a reputation as one of the most skilled neurosurgeons in New England. His patients adored him for his precision and calm demeanor, but at home, he was critical, emotionally distant, and fixated on creating a legacy through his son. He measured success not just in accomplishments, but in recognition and status. A published paper was worthless unless it appeared in a top-tier journal. A medical position meant nothing unless it came with authority and prestige. And a daughter, it seemed, could never quite measure up to a son, regardless of her capabilities. His dismissal of my achievements wasn't simply oversight. It was a deliberate reinforcement of his belief that women in medicine should aim for supportive roles rather than pioneering ones. My mother, Grace, presents one of the most painful contradictions in my life. A brilliant scholar who wrote definitive texts on Chinese art during the Cultural Revolution. She built her academic reputation analyzing how women artists were systematically erased from historical narratives. Yet at home, she watched my father diminish my accomplishments
without objection. During that devastating graduation dinner, she sat silently as my father declared I would never succeed in medicine. Her eyes fixed on her plate, hands folded in her lap. Later that night, she came to my room with tea and sympathy, whispering that I should understand your father's traditional mindset and not take his words to heart. Her pattern became familiar: private consolation after public humiliation, never direct defense or confrontation. She would slip journal articles about women in science under my door, send encouraging texts before my presentations, but never challenge my father's behavior directly.
Her silence felt like complicity. Even as I recognized her own complex negotiation of cultural expectations as a successful Asian woman in academia. My brother Michael, 3 years my senior, became both my father's protege and my most consistent competitor. Growing up, Michael wasn't malicious toward me. In fact, he often seemed uncomfortable with our father's obvious favoritism. He would sometimes attempt to highlight my achievements during family dinners or redirect conversations when comparisons became too explicit. But he also benefited tremendously from being the designated successor. He received one-on-one mentorship from my father's colleagues, was introduced to hospital board members at private clubs, and had research opportunities arranged before he'd even completed his pre-med requirements. By the time he finished his neurosurgery residency at Yale, he had co-authored 17 papers, most with senior researchers from my father's professional network. Now, at 36, Michael is the youngest department chair in Boston University Medical Center's history. Our relationship remains complicated, a mixture of genuine sibling affection and the unavoidable tension created by our father's relentless comparisons. The pattern of differential treatment began early. When I was 9, I won the regional science fair with the project on neural pathways, beating students 3 grades above me. My father's response was to question whether the judges had lowered their standards that year. When Michael won the same competition 2 years later, my father framed the certificate and took the family to celebrate at the city's most expensive restaurant. When I was accepted to Phillips Academy Andover with a merit scholarship, my father wondered aloud if they had needed to fill a quota. When Michael received the same acceptance letter, my father bought him his first Rolex. The summer before college, I was offered an internship at a prestigious research lab, but my father insisted I needed to improve my Mandarin instead, sending me to stay with relatives in Taipei. Michael spent his pre-college summer shadowing my father's colleague at Mass General, an opportunity that led to his first published research credit as an undergraduate. 3 months ago, I made what I thought was a generous gesture of reconciliation. I donated $250,000 to establish the William Chen Fellowship for Neurological Research at Mass General. A significant portion of the grant money I'd received for my pancreatic cancer detection work. I wanted to honor my father while proving I had finally made it in medicine. The fellowship would fund innovative research approaches, particularly from researchers taking unconventional paths, the kind of support I wished I'd had early in my career. I imagined my father would finally see me as a peer, someone who had earned her place in the medical community. I presented him with the certificate in a small family dinner, watching his face for signs of pride or acknowledgement. He glanced at it briefly, said, "That's nice, Melissa," and immediately turned to ask Michael about his upcoming presentation at a neurosurgery conference in Switzerland. The certificate now sits in my father's office, partially hidden behind larger awards and photographs of him with Michael in matching surgical gowns. My grandmother's journal wasn't just a document. It was a devastating confirmation of suspicions I had carried for decades. My father's mother, Mei Lin Chen,
had been a respected physician herself in Taiwan before immigrating to America in her 50s. We had always been close, and she often praised my determination in ways my parents never did. After her death last year at 93, I volunteered to help clear out her Providence home. Behind a panel in her bedroom closet, I discovered a small, locked box containing her private journals. Most entries were in Mandarin, which I painfully translated with my imperfect language skills. The entries from my childhood revealed how she had observed my father's treatment of me with growing concern. The most shocking entry described how she had confronted my father after discovering he had intercepted an acceptance letter and scholarship offer I had received at age 16 to attend a prestigious summer science program at MIT. According to her journal, my father had declined on my behalf, then encouraged Michael to apply the following year. The program, the National Youth Science Foundation's Advanced Research Institute, would have connected me with mentors and put me on an accelerated path years before I eventually found my way.
My grandmother wrote that when she confronted him, my father justified his actions by saying the program would have created unrealistic expectations for me, and that Michael would make better use of those connections. The journal contained other incidents: recommendation letters never sent, opportunities mentioned to Michael but not to me, subtle sabotage that shaped the narrative that I was less capable than my brother. The annual Chen family 4th of July barbecue is a fixture in Boston's medical community calendar, less a casual backyard gathering than a strategic networking event disguised as a patriotic celebration. This year marks its 20th anniversary, and the guest list has expanded to include the governor, who has been a patient of my father's, along with hospital board members, department chairs, research directors, and even a few pharmaceutical executives who fund medical research. In previous years, I attended dutifully, accepting my role as the other Dr. Chen, who would be introduced briefly before conversations turned to Michael's latest achievements. But this year feels different. With my grandmother's journal carefully photocopied and stored in my bag, I approached the event with a strange mixture of dread and determination. I've spent weeks in therapy processing what I've learned, working through the anger and betrayal while formulating a plan. I've prepared talking points about my research, dressed in a tailored navy dress that projects confidence, and even rehearsed responses to the inevitable comparisons. For the first time, I'm not arriving seeking validation. I'm arriving with the knowledge that the validation I sought was deliberately withheld through active sabotage, rather than mere oversight. When I arrive at my parents' home, the party is already in full swing. The catering staff circulates with trays of lobster rolls and clam chowder shots. A jazz quartet plays on the terrace, and my father holds court near the bar, surrounded by admiring colleagues. I head straight for him, the envelope containing information about the fellowship endowment, in my hand. "Dad," I interrupt during a pause in conversation, "I brought some additional materials about the fellowship endowment for you to review." He takes the envelope with a distracted smile, barely making eye contact. "Thank you, Melissa. Have you seen the governor's arrived? Michael's just been showing him the models of the new neurosurgery wing, the one they're naming after your grandfather." He places the envelope on his side table without opening it, then guides me away from his circle with a hand on my shoulder. "Your mother needs help with something in the kitchen, I think." As I walk away, I hear him smoothly return to his previous conversation about Michael's recent publication in the New England Journal of Medicine. The envelope remains untouched on the table, eventually buried under cocktail napkins and appetizer plates. Despite preparing myself for disappointment, the casual dismissal still stings. But this time, it also strengthens my resolve. My cousin Audrey, a pediatric nurse who has always been more like a sister to me, notices my expression as I escape to a quiet corner of the garden. "He didn't even look at it, did he?" she asks, handing me a glass of champagne. "One day I'll stop expecting anything different," I respond with a forced smile. As we talk, my mother approaches with my Aunt Linda, my father's sister, who flew in from California for the event.
"Melissa, your research was mentioned in the Boston Medical Journal this month, wasn't it?" my aunt asks warmly. Before I can answer, my mother interjects. "Yes, it was a small feature in their emerging research section." I feel my shoulders tense. "Actually, Mom, it was the cover article of their innovation issue, highlighting our team's work as the most promising advancement in pancreatic cancer detection in the last decade." An awkward silence follows. My aunt looks between us, then squeezes my arm. "I saw it online. Impressive work. You've always had a brilliant analytical mind, ever since you were little." My mother smiles tightly and changes the subject to the upcoming hospital charity gala. Later, Audrey finds me again. "Your mom means well, you know. She just doesn't know how to navigate between you and your dad." The explanation is familiar, but no longer satisfying. "At some point, meaning well isn't enough," I reply. As I circulate through the party, I find myself seeing the family dynamics with painful clarity. My father introduces Michael to every VIP, his hand proudly on my brother's shoulder as he details Michael's recent appointment to the hospital board's innovation committee. When it's my turn to be introduced, I'm my daughter Melissa, also in medicine, with no mention of my research, my team, or my recent award. I notice how my mother hovers anxiously when my father and I are in conversation, ready to smooth over any tension. I see how relatives defer to my father's assessments of our respective accomplishments, nodding along when he describes Michael's work as groundbreaking and mine as interesting. Most painfully, I observe how this narrative has become so established that even I have internalized it, feeling a flash of surprise when a hospital administrator approaches me directly to discuss my research rather than seeking out my brother. I'm no longer just a participant in this family story. I'm an observer, cataloging the subtle and not so subtle ways this hierarchy is reinforced through 1,000 small interactions. The tension builds through cocktail hour as I endure a series of microaggressions that once would have seemed normal. My father corrects my explanation of my own research to a colleague. What Melissa means is... My mother redirects a conversation about my upcoming speaking engagement at Johns Hopkins. "Michael gave the keynote there last year, didn't he?" My cousin's husband asks about my research funding, then comments, "Impressive for someone who wasn't originally interested in the academic track," repeating a family myth about my early career intentions that my father has perpetuated for years. Each interaction feels like a small paper cut, minor in isolation, but increasingly painful in accumulation. During dinner, I'm seated at a table with distant family friends rather than at the main table with my parents, Michael, and the governor. I watch from across the lawn as my father raises a toast to the next generation of Chen medical excellence, his eyes fixed on my brother. Michael catches my gaze and gives me a small, apologetic smile, but makes no attempt to include me in the moment of recognition. The breaking point comes during dessert. My father stands to make his annual speech, champagne glass in hand. He begins with his typical acknowledgments, thanking guests for coming, celebrating American independence and immigrant success, highlighting the Chen family's contributions to Boston medicine. Then he turns to family accomplishments. "This has been an extraordinary year for our family," he says, beaming. "Michael has been appointed the youngest department chair in Boston University Medical Center history, continuing our family's tradition of leadership in neurosurgery. His recent paper on neural regeneration techniques has been cited in over 30 subsequent studies, and the clinical trial he's heading has received the largest grant in the department's history." Applause follows, and Michael stands briefly, acknowledging the recognition with practiced humility. My father continues, "And of course we're proud of all our family members and their various pursuits." He gestures vaguely in my direction, but doesn't pause for applause or elaboration, before moving on to thank the catering staff. The deliberate minimization of my work, particularly following a year in which I received a gubernatorial award and published what many consider a landmark study, leaves me breathless with anger. What makes it worse is seeing the governor himself looking confused, glancing between my father and me with furrowed brows. He knows exactly what I've accomplished this year, having personally presented me with an award for it. Yet, in my father's narrative, these achievements don't even merit specific mention? The evening progresses toward what my father considers the highlight of every annual gathering, his informal fireside chat where he holds court on the state of medicine, sharing anecdotes that inevitably position him and Michael at the center of every medical breakthrough worth mentioning. Guests gather on the terrace as servers distribute cognac and dessert wine. I find myself positioned at the periphery, watching from across the lawn as my father settles into the oversized chair that has become his unofficial throne for these occasions. Before we discuss the exciting developments in neurosurgery, he begins, I want to acknowledge my pride in our family's continued contributions to medicine. He gestures toward Michael. My son has been invited to join the International Neurological Congress Steering Committee, the youngest member in its 80-year history. Approving murmurs ripple through the crowd. Then my father's gaze shifts briefly to me. And Melissa has been doing some interesting work in screening methodologies. She's always had a knack for laboratory procedures, detail-oriented work that suits her temperament. He smiles thinly.
Though we had hoped she might eventually return to clinical practice where patient relationships are so important for women physicians. The comment lands like a slap, not just dismissing my research, but suggesting it's merely a diversion from what he considers the appropriate medical career for a woman. The governor, standing near the front, looks startled at my father's characterization, glancing between us with evident confusion. The room seems to tilt slightly as something inside me finally breaks free. 15 years of diminishment. A lifetime of being the afterthought in my own family. The concrete evidence of sabotage, documented in my grandmother's careful handwriting. The $250,000 gesture dismissed without a second thought. Every cellular level exhaustion from fighting twice as hard for half the recognition crystallizes into absolute clarity. I no longer care about maintaining the facade of the perfect Chen family. I no longer fear disappointing a father who has been actively undermining me since childhood. With steady hands, I reach into my bag and remove the folder containing the photocopied pages from my grandmother's journal. Actually, I say, my voice cutting through the murmured conversations that followed my father's remarks, I think it's time we talked about my work directly, rather than through mischaracterizations. The room quiets immediately, guests sensing the tension beneath my measured tone. My father's expression flickers between surprise and irritation at the interruption of his carefully orchestrated evening. For those who aren't aware, I continue, walking slowly toward the center of the gathering, our team at Boston Medical Center has developed a blood test that can detect pancreatic cancer up to 18 months earlier than current methods, increasing the 5-year survival rate from 9% to nearly 45% in our clinical trials. I turn to address the governor directly. As Governor Wallace acknowledged when presenting us with the Physician of the Year award 6 months ago, this represents one of the most significant advancements in pancreatic cancer treatment in decades. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd, not at the achievement itself, which had been covered extensively in medical journals and local media, but at the revelation that my father had apparently never mentioned it to his closest colleagues and friends. My father shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his expression darkening. Melissa, this isn't the appropriate forum for... But I continue as if he hadn't spoken. What's particularly interesting about scientific achievement, I say, opening the folder, is how it's influenced by early opportunities and mentorship, or in some cases by the deliberate withholding of those opportunities. With steady hands, I remove the first photocopied page from my grandmother's journal. My grandmother, Dr. Mei-Lin Chen, kept detailed journals throughout her life. After her passing last year, I discovered these while cleaning out her home. I turned to face my father directly.
I'd like to read an entry from June 15th, 1998, the summer before my junior year of high school. My father's face drains of color as recognition dawns. Today, I discovered something that has deeply disturbed me, I read from the journal. William has intercepted Melissa's acceptance to the National Youth Science Foundation's summer program at MIT, a prestigious opportunity that included a full scholarship and mentorship with Dr. Elizabeth Chen in cancer research. When I confronted him, William admitted that he had declined the offer without telling Melissa, saying she wasn't ready for such an opportunity and that it would create unrealistic expectations. He then confessed he planned to encourage Michael to apply for the same program next year, as the connections would be more valuable for his career. Gasps and uncomfortable shifting fill the room. My mother has gone completely still, her hand covering her mouth. Michael looks stunned, genuinely shocked by this revelation. I look up from the page, my gaze steady, as I address the silent room. This wasn't an isolated incident. My grandmother documented at least 7 occasions where my father actively interfered with opportunities that might have advanced my career, from scholarships to mentorships to research positions. I turn back to my father, whose face has transformed from shock to cold anger.
I've spent my entire career working twice as hard to overcome obstacles I never understood were being placed in my path by the person who should have been removing them. The silence in the room is absolute. Even the catering staff has paused, frozen in place with their trays of desserts and drinks. My father stands abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the stone terrace. "This is absolutely inappropriate," he hisses. "You're misinterpreting private family matters and embarrassing yourself." I slip the journal pages back into the folder and close it deliberately. I'm not here to argue about the past, Dad. I'm here to reclaim my present and future. I address the assembled guests directly. The William Chen Fellowship for Neurological Research that I established with $250,000 of my own research grant money, the fellowship my father hasn't bothered to acknowledge tonight or in the 3 months since I created it, will continue. But effective immediately, I'm changing its focus to support specifically women and minorities in medicine who face institutional barriers to their advancement. I lift my chin slightly, and I'm renaming it the Mei Lin Chen Fellowship for Medical Innovation, in honor of my grandmother, who recognized artificial barriers in medicine decades before the rest of us caught up. The governor steps forward, his expression a mixture of admiration and discomfort at witnessing such a personal confrontation. "Dr. Chen, Melissa, your work has already changed the landscape of early cancer detection. I had no idea," he trails off, glancing uncomfortably at my father. "Perhaps this is a conversation best continued at my office. I'd be honored to discuss how the state can further support your research initiative." I gather my purse and the folder containing my grandmother's journal pages. The fellowship certificate, the one I'd presented to my father 3 months ago, that now sat buried under papers in his office, I leave behind. I've spent my entire life seeking validation from someone who is actively working against my success. Tonight that ends. I'm no longer measuring my worth against a deliberately impossible standard. I turn to leave, pausing only to accept a brief, fierce hug from my cousin Audrey and a stunned, wordless embrace from Michael, who looks as though his entire understanding of our family has been upended in minutes. As I walk toward the exit, I hear my father's voice, tight with controlled fury. "Melissa has always had a flair for the dramatic. Please excuse this unfortunate display." But his words no longer have power over me. For the first time, I'm walking away from my family's narrative with my own intact. Behind me, I hear my mother's voice rising uncharacteristically. "William, enough. For once in your life, enough." And then the governor. "Dr. Chen, I think we need to have a conversation about the state's continued funding relationship with your department." My father's carefully constructed image crumbles visibly as I walk away. His face contorts through shock, rage, and finally, most surprisingly,
Fear. The man who has always controlled every room, every narrative, every family dynamic, suddenly looks small and defensive as colleagues regard him with new eyes. His voice rises, becoming uncharacteristically emotional. This is a private family matter. Melissa has always been, but for perhaps the first time in his professional life, people are not deferring to his assessment. The governor has turned away from him mid-sentence to follow me. 2 hospital board members exchanged meaningful glances. My mother has stepped physically between my father and the departing guests, her hand raised in a silencing gesture I've never seen her use before. My father's voice cracks as he calls after me. "Melissa, you cannot just—" But I'm already through the garden gate, walking steadily toward my car, the weight of decades of diminishment falling away with each step. Behind me, the carefully orchestrated social gathering has dissolved into uncomfortable clusters of conversation, with my father no longer at the center of any of them. The aftermath is immediate and overwhelming. By the time I reach my apartment in Cambridge, my phone has exploded with notifications. 37 text messages, 22 missed calls, and dozens of email alerts. My hand shakes slightly as I scroll through them, surprised by the range of responses. There's a terse message from my father. "Your behavior was unacceptable. We'll discuss this privately." My mother has sent 7 increasingly urgent texts, the first reading, "Please call me," and the last, "I had no idea, Melissa. None. We need to talk." Michael's message is simple but stunning. "I'm so sorry. I never knew. Can we meet tomorrow?" But what surprises me most are the messages from people I barely know. My father's colleagues, hospital administrators, even 2 members of the governor's staff. "Your research deserves recognition. I'd like to discuss funding opportunities for your lab. The governor would like to meet with you next week to discuss state research initiatives." Most unexpectedly, there's a long email from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the very researcher whose mentorship program I'd been prevented from joining as a teenager, saying she remembers my application from 20 years ago, has followed my career with interest, and would like to collaborate on expanding my screening protocols to other cancer types. It's as if a dam has broken, washing away years of artificial barriers in a single evening flood. 3 days after the confrontation, I meet my mother at a small cafe in Brookline, far from my father's usual haunts. She looks smaller somehow, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from what appears to be several days of crying. "I need you to know I didn't know about the scholarship," she begins before even sitting down, "or any of it. I knew your father favored Michael, but I thought it was just traditional thinking, old world values he brought from Taiwan. I never imagined he was actively sabotaging you." Her hands tremble as she stirs her untouched tea. "I've spent 3 days going through family papers, finding evidence of everything your grandmother wrote about. There were letters from programs I never knew contacted you, opportunities that were redirected to Michael." She looks up, her expression raw with grief and guilt. "You failed me, Melissa. I thought I was supporting you by encouraging you privately while respecting your father's authority publicly. I told myself that was the cultural balance, that it was how I had been raised. But I was wrong." She reaches across the table, grasping my hand. "I've spent my entire academic career writing about women who were erased from history by patriarchal systems, while allowing my own daughter to be diminished right in front of me. For the first time in my adult life, I see my mother not as an accessory to my father's narrative, but as someone trapped in her own impossible negotiation between cultures, generations, and expectations." "What happens now?" I ask quietly. She straightens her shoulders. "My father and I are separating. I've taken a sabbatical from BU and moved into the faculty housing near campus. I don't know what comes next, but I know I can't go back to pretending." A week after the barbecue, I find myself sitting across from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, no relation, in her office at MIT. At 72, she remains one of the most respected cancer researchers in the country, with 3 decades of mentoring young scientists behind her. Your application stood out even among a very competitive field, she tells me, retrieving a file from her cabinet. I kept it, you know. We don't usually retain rejected applications, but something about yours. The clarity of purpose, perhaps. And then when you declined so abruptly after acceptance, it struck me as odd. She slides a yellowed letter across the desk, the declination letter with my forged signature. I suspected at the time that something wasn't right. The writing style didn't match your application essays. She sighs. I should have investigated further. We lose too many promising minds to these kinds of invisible barriers. We spend the next 2 hours discussing not just my research, but the barriers women and minorities continue to face in medicine. By the time I leave, we've outlined a joint mentorship program that will run alongside the Mei Lin Chen Fellowship, specifically targeting talented students from underrepresented backgrounds. Your grandmother would be proud, Dr. Chen says as I leave, not just of your scientific achievements, but of your courage in breaking the cycle. It feels like coming full circle, finding the mentor I should have had 20 years earlier and transforming that loss into opportunity for others. The stark contrast between my father and Dr. Chen could not be more pronounced. Where my father used his position to consolidate power within our family and his professional circle, Dr. Chen has spent her career creating pathways for others. Where my father saw achievement as a zero-sum game in which Michael's success required my limitation, Dr. Chen sees scientific progress as inherently collaborative and strengthened by diverse perspectives. Most painfully, I realize my father's mentorship, which I desperately sought for decades, would likely have come with the same strings that controlled my brother. Conditional approval based on reflecting my father's own values and ambitions back to him.
Michael calls me late one night, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. I've been going through some of my early research papers, he says, the ones Dad helped me publish. I'm finding concerning patterns, data that seems too perfect, conclusions that overreach the evidence. He pauses. I'm conducting an internal review of all my published work. I need to know what's truly mine and what was manufactured to support a narrative. I feel a surge of empathy for my brother, who I now understand may have been as much a victim of our father's controlling narrative as I was, just in a very different way. In the weeks following the confrontation, I begin a more intensive therapy regimen focused on healing from the decades of gaslighting and diminishment. What you're describing is a specific form of family trauma, my therapist explains. Your achievements weren't just undervalued, they were actively sabotaged, and then you were made to believe you're imagining the unfair treatment. The validation of these experiences, having a name for what happened, and understanding its psychological impact provides its own form of healing. I learned to recognize the internalized voice of my father in my thoughts, the one that questions my abilities, that suggests any recognition is luck or politics rather than merit, that compares my achievements unfavorably to others. Most importantly, I begin to understand that my worth is not determined by external validation, especially from someone who was actively working to undermine me. I start keeping a journal of my own, documenting not just professional milestones, but moments of personal growth, connections with colleagues and friends, and the gradual reconstruction of my sense of self outside my father's narrative. The fellowship donation that my father dismissed so casually becomes the foundation for something far more meaningful than I had initially intended.
With the name changed to honor my grandmother and the focus shifted to supporting underrepresented groups in medicine, the Mei Lin Chen Fellowship receives matching funds from 3 hospital systems and a major pharmaceutical company. Within a month, it grows from my initial $250,000 to a $1.5 million endowment that will support 5 researchers annually. At the formal announcement event, I display a large portrait of my grandmother in her white coat from her days practicing medicine in Taiwan. Dr. Mei Lin Chen faced barriers to her practice when she immigrated to America in her 50s. Despite being a respected physician in Taiwan, she was relegated to research assistance roles in the U.S. due to licensing restrictions. She understood how arbitrary barriers can limit potential, and she did what she could to identify and remove those barriers for others. The governor, who has become an unexpected ally, announces additional state funding for the initiative. Sometimes, the most important medical innovations come from those who have had to find unconventional paths forward, he says. This fellowship recognizes that diverse perspectives strengthen medical research. I catch my mother's eye in the audience, and we share a moment of quiet acknowledgement. This is the legacy my grandmother deserved. My understanding of family undergoes a profound transformation during this period. As my relationship with my father remains strained to the point of non-communication, I find myself surrounded by a network of support I hadn't fully recognized before. My cousin Audrey becomes a regular presence in my life, joining me for Sunday brunches and late-night conversations about growing up in the shadow of the Chen family expectations. My research team, many of whom witnessed my father's dismissiveness at medical conferences over the years, rally around me with a fierce loyalty that feels more familial than professional. Dr. Elizabeth Chen introduces me to her circle of women in medicine, creating an informal mentorship network that provides the guidance and support I should have had decades earlier. Most surprisingly, my brother Michael and I begin rebuilding our relationship outside our father's influence. I always knew he treated us differently, Michael admits during a long dinner at my apartment. But I told myself it was because you were stronger than me, that you didn't need the extra support. He shakes his head. I never imagined he was actively holding you back. I think part of me didn't want to see it because then I'd have to question everything I thought I'd earned. We're working through decades of complicated emotions. But for the first time, we're doing it as allies rather than as competitors in our father's manufactured rivalry.
The most unexpected development comes 6 months after the confrontation, when I receive an invitation to speak at the National Medical Innovation Conference, a prestigious event where 3 years earlier, my father had been a keynote speaker and had forgotten to mention my research when discussing advances in cancer detection. As I prepare my presentation on our lab's latest refinements to the pancreatic cancer screening protocol, I receive an email from the conference organizer. "We've had an unusual request," it reads. "Your father has asked to introduce you before your keynote address." My initial reaction is suspicion and anger. Is this another attempt to control the narrative, to position himself as the supportive father he never was? I discuss it with my therapist, with Michael, with my mother. Finally, I agree with explicit conditions. I will review his introduction in advance, and there will be no last-minute changes. When the draft arrives, I'm stunned to find a straightforward, honest acknowledgement. I failed to support my daughter's exceptional talent and actively placed obstacles in her path. Despite this, her groundbreaking work in cancer detection is saving thousands of lives. The medical community is fortunate that her determination was stronger than my interference. It's not an apology, not really,
But it's an unprecedented admission from a man who has never acknowledged being wrong about anything. I approved the text with no changes, uncertain what this means for our future, but recognizing it as a significant shift in our relationship I had assumed was irreparable. Looking back on the journey of the past year, I'm struck by how fundamentally my understanding of success and validation has transformed. The little girl who desperately sought her father's approval has become a woman who measures her worth by the impact of her work and the authenticity of her relationships. The most profound lesson I've learned is that true validation can never come from those who are invested in limiting your potential. My father's approval, which I chased for decades, was designed to be perpetually out of reach, not because of any deficiency in me, but because his worldview required my diminishment to maintain the family hierarchy he envisioned. Breaking free from that dynamic hasn't just changed my relationship with my family, it's changed my relationship with myself. I no longer question whether my achievements are good enough or whether I deserve the recognition I receive. I've stopped apologizing for taking up space in rooms where I've earned my place. Most importantly, I've learned that healing doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means establishing boundaries that protect your sense of self from those who cannot see you clearly. The most unexpected outcome of confronting my family's dynamics has been watching how it rippled through my professional life. When I stopped internalizing my father's narrative about my capabilities, I found myself speaking more confidently in research meetings, pursuing more ambitious funding opportunities, and mentoring junior colleagues with a clarity I previously lacked. The screening protocol our team developed has now been implemented in 43 hospital systems across the country, with international adoption beginning in Canada, the UK, and Australia. I've been invited to speak at 17 major medical conferences this year, not as William Chen's daughter, but as a leading researcher in early cancer detection. The Mei-Lin Chen Fellowship has supported its first cohort of 5 researchers, all from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in medical research leadership. When I see their excitement and ambition, I recognize my younger self. But these researchers will have the support and mentorship I was denied. Breaking the cycle of diminishment doesn't just heal the individual, it creates space for others to thrive without the arbitrary barriers that held back previous generations. My relationship with my father remains complicated. After his public acknowledgement of his interference at the National Medical Innovation Conference, we've established a careful, limited relationship. We see each other at professional events and occasional family gatherings, maintaining a civil distance that acknowledges both our connection and the harm that occurred. He has never offered a direct apology, but I've come to understand that expecting him to fundamentally change his worldview at 73 is its own form of unrealistic expectation. Instead, I've accepted that he's a flawed man, shaped by his own cultural and generational context. A brilliant surgeon who achieved remarkable things while causing significant damage through his rigid, hierarchical thinking. My mother, on the other hand, has undergone a transformation that continues to surprise me.
After decades of quiet accommodation, she has found her voice not just in our family, but in her professional work. Her newest academic project explores the intergenerational transmission of gender limitations in immigrant families, drawing partly from our own experience. We meet weekly for dinner, rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect rather than shared complicity in my father's narrative. The relationship that has healed most profoundly is with my brother Michael. Once we were removed from our father's comparative framework, we discovered a genuine connection based on shared experiences and complementary strength. Michael has undergone his own reckoning, reviewing his early research with painful honesty and acknowledging the advantages he received through our father's favoritism. Rather than diminishing his confidence, this process seems to have strengthened his commitment to ethical research practices. We've even begun a small collaborative project, combining his expertise in neurosurgery with my background in early detection methodologies. Last month, we co-published a paper examining potential neurological markers for early-stage pancreatic cancer, work that might never have happened if we'd remained locked in our father's competitive framework. The most healing moment came when Michael admitted, "For years, I thought Dad's favoritism meant he saw something special in me. Now I realize it was never about either of us as individuals. It was about his need to control the narrative and create a legacy that matched his expectations." Throughout this journey, I've often thought about the concept of sunk costs, not just in economic terms, but emotional ones. How many years did I invest in seeking validation from someone who was actively undermining me? How much emotional energy did I expend trying to prove my worth to someone who had decided before I'd even begun that I would never measure up? The fellowship donation that my father dismissed, money I'd earned through my own research, became the perfect symbol of this dynamic. I had literally invested $250,000 in one last attempt to earn my father's recognition. When I redirected that investment towards supporting others who face similar barriers, it transformed from a symbol of my continued seeking of approval into a concrete action that aligned with my actual values. The Mei Lin Chen Fellowship now stands as testament not to my father's legacy, but to my grandmother's vision of medicine as a field where talent should transcend arbitrary limitations. The money that once represented my desperation for validation now represents my commitment to ensuring others don't face the same invisible barriers I did. The process of redefining family has been both challenging and liberating. I've learned that family isn't determined solely by DNA or legal ties. It's created through consistent support, honest communication, and mutual respect. My research team has become a kind of family, celebrating breakthroughs together and supporting each other through setbacks. The network of women physicians Dr. Elizabeth Chen introduced me to has provided the mentorship and guidance I should have had throughout my career. My cousin Audrey and her children have become regular fixtures in my life, creating the kind of supportive extended family connections I always craved. Even my relationship with my mother has evolved into something more resembling friendship between equals than the hierarchical parent-child dynamic that dominated my early life. Most surprisingly, I found family-like connections with patients who've benefited from our screening protocol, people who write to share their stories of early detection and successful treatment, creating a profound sense of purpose that no parental validation could ever match. The most unexpected twist in this journey came 3 weeks ago when I received a call from Governor Wallace's office. The state's medical board was establishing a new advisory council on innovative research methodologies, and they wanted me to serve as inaugural chair. What made this offer particularly remarkable was learning that my father had been approached first and had declined, recommending me instead as more qualified in contemporary research approaches. The staff member who called seemed uncertain how to frame this information, clearly aware of our complicated history. After a moment of stunned silence, I found myself laughing, not bitterly, but with genuine amusement at the irony. My father, who had spent decades positioning my brother as his only worthy successor, had publicly acknowledged my superior qualification for a prestigious appointment. Whether this represented genuine growth on his part or simply a strategic adaptation to changed circumstances, it marked a definitive shift in our family's narrative.
2 days later, I accepted the appointment, with my first initiative being the establishment of a mentorship pipeline for young researchers from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in medical leadership. Have you ever looked back at a challenging chapter in your life and realized it was preparing you for something greater than you could have imagined? The years I spent fighting for recognition within my family equipped me with the resilience and determination that ultimately fueled my research breakthroughs. The experience of having my abilities consistently underestimated taught me to over-prepare, to document meticulously, to build irrefutable evidence for my conclusions. All skills that proved invaluable in developing a screening protocol that had to overcome significant skepticism from the medical establishment. Even the painful awareness of being treated differently from my brother heightened my sensitivity to disparities in medicine more broadly, informing my current work addressing healthcare inequities. The obstacles my father placed in my path didn't prevent my success. They shaped the particular form that success has taken, creating a physician researcher who is particularly attuned to systemic barriers and committed to dismantling them. If you're watching this and my story resonates with your experience, I want you to know that your value isn't determined by those who fail to see your potential. Whether you're facing diminishment from family, colleagues, or broader social systems, your worth exists independently of others' recognition of it. The validation you're seeking from someone who is invested in limiting you will never be fully granted, not because you don't deserve it, but because their worldview requires your diminishment. Breaking free from these dynamics isn't about dramatic confrontations, though sometimes those happen. It's about the daily practice of defining success on your own terms, building connections with those who see you clearly, and creating space for others facing similar barriers. If my journey from being dismissed at my graduation dinner to being named Physician of the Year teaches anything, it's that the narrative others create about you doesn't have to determine the story you ultimately write for yourself. If this story resonated with you, please share in the comments how you've redefined family or success in your own life. Perhaps you've broken free from limiting family expectations, found mentors who recognized your potential when biological family couldn't, or created your own path in a field where others doubted you belonged. Like and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and professional challenges. And share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by those who fail to recognize their gifts. Remember that sometimes the people who should support us the most are actually undermining us in ways we can't imagine. And recognizing this truth isn't admitting defeat, but taking the first step toward authentic success on your own terms.